And this is an interview for the Valley Historical Project, and I'm going to do the interviewing, and Ken's going to do the camera work. The date is March 16th, 1998, and we're at the Schoien home. We want to thank you both for granting us this interview. The material will be used to interpret the heritage of this region. It will be primarily used for educational purposes, but it may also be used in promoting economic development and tourism. We'll start with Corrine. Would you like to give us your full name?
Corrine Schoien.
You have a middle name?
Elizabeth.
Okay. And tell us where and when you were born.
I was born August 13th, 1926 at Monona, Iowa.
Oh, you weren't born in this house?
No.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about your parents, where they were born?
Well, my dad was born in southwestern Minnesota, where his parents were homesteading, and my mother was born just up here on the hill, in a house.
Did you have anyone who immigrated to the United States in your family?
Yes, 3 of our grandparents immigrated, and the fourth grandparent was born here, but her parents had come, and we had great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents immigrate also.
From where?
From Norway.
All from Norway?
All from, yes.
So are you a purebred Norwegian?
Well, I suppose we're really Americans now. But
All right, now we'll turn to Arlene. And will you give us your name and your birth?
Okay, I'm Arlene, and I was born on a farm near Farmersburg on April 1st, 1921. And probably the unique thing about my birth was the doctor died when I was 6 weeks old, and there was no bill. I was free.
she was also April Fool.
I was going to say you were also April Fool. That's unique. You were April Fool, and that was the joke. You were a free baby.
Free baby.
That is unique. Okay, now I noticed now you weren't both born in the same place.
No.
So your parents moved in between. All right. Corrine, do you want to start with your education?
Well, I started school in the country in Albuquerque County, and when I was 8 years old, we came to live here. And I went to the school over across the hill where my mother and my grandmother Torkelson had gone for part of the time, and part of the time I went to the school down the road, the Cook School, where my grandfather and my mother had gone. And the schools are identical.
Unique.
Both Little Rock schools.
And now, Arlene, is your education, well, you haven't finished telling.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I went to high school in Elkader, and I went to high school in Elgin 1 year. I graduated from Elkader in 1943. Then I went to Upper Iowa and for 1 summer, and then I went to Elkader Junior College for a year. Then I taught school in the country for 3 years, and then I went back to Iowa State and got my degree in dietetics. And then following that, when I decided to become a teacher, I took classes at Upper Iowa so that I got a permanent professional teaching certificate. And of course I took lots of classes in between.
Now then you had a lifetime certificate?
Yes, yes.
And they don't have those anymore?
No.
Because I don't even have one.
No. I was the last one. Got it the last year that you could get one without having a master's degree.
What did you have to do to get a lifetime?
I had to have 30 hours of credit beyond my bachelor's. And of course I had that plus by the time I got my education classes done.
Okay. Now we'll turn to Arlene.
Okay, I started school at Monona, Iowa, where we lived, and I went to grades through the 3rd grade. And then we moved to a farm near Lansing, and there I went to a rural school in Albuquerque County from 3rd grade to 8th grade. And then I went to high school in Lansing just a half a year, and we knew we were coming over here to live. So I came over at Christmas time to Elgin, and I stayed with my grandmother. And I graduated from Elgin in 1938. And then I was home a year, poor, no money. And I did everything around. I did housework for people around. And after I was home a year, Corrine was going to go to high school. So the superintendent was out, advertising for students, and I was leaning up against the kitchen stove here in the kitchen, and he asked me what I did. And I said, well, I graduated, but I didn't have any money to go to school. He said, well, would you go to junior college if we got you a place to work for your room and board and half your tuition? And I did. So I went to junior college, 39 and 40, and I started teaching.
Where?
Elgin.
Okay.
And then I started teaching in 1940 back over the hill here where my grandmother had gone to school and my mother too, and I taught 1 year. And then the cook school opened up, so that was on the road. That was easier traveling, so I taught there 3 years. And then I went to Garnaville, and I taught 2 years. And then I came to Elgin, and then I decided that I must have more school, so I went to Cedar Falls 3 summers and got my pre-professional certificate. And from there I went and taught in Waverly for 5 years and took classes at Cedar Falls. And I came home and taught 1 year in Elgin. And I finally earned, then there was a job in Elgin. I moved to Elgin for the remaining 28 years. And in 1960, I had earned my degree from Upper Iowa by taking night classes. I went 1 summer, 1 5-week period, and I had my degree.
So you're a perfect example of lifelong learning. Very good. Now, let's move back to, so how long have you two been in this area?
Since 1935.
Since 1935. So you've really seen a lot of history in that time.
I guess so.
Okay. And now we'll go back to, would you like to tell us a little bit about your church? I know that's played an important part in your life.
Well, even though I was born at Monona, I was baptized at Highland Lutheran, which is a mile south of here. And the first church I remember going to, of course, was at Lansing because we lived near there. But after I was 8 years old, since I was 8 years old, we went to church at Highland. And Highland will celebrate their 100th birthday or anniversary in the year 2000. I was confirmed at Highland and have attended off and on all the time. What would you like me to tell you?
Well, I think you've always been very active in your church.
Oh yes. I have done the Sunday school, the Bible school routine, both as a student and as a teacher. And Christmas program I have been, and I have been after I retired, I was the president of the ELCW for 7 years, and we do a lot of work. This winter, Arlene and I have made 20 quilts for the mission.
I thought I saw some quilts out there.
And we've got lots of soap, lots of fat in the basement that Arlene is going to make into soap for the mission.
You're going to make soap?
1 year I made 225 pounds that we gave to mission.
I noticed that on the list for the Synod, the soap making had kind of gone down, but we still have some faithful soap makers.
Well, I think it was hard for people to use. They finally woke up and they took the bar soap and ground it up so people would use it, like soap powder.
Oh, you mean they didn't use it as...
Well, I don't think they knew how to use it.
Do you ever use that soap?
Scrubbing.
To get out stains and scrubbing? Arlene, do you have anything you would want to add about the church?
No, not really. I taught Bible school and Sunday school the same as she did.
And originally your church was part of a 3-part parish?
Yes. Well, there was a little before that too, but for many years, until the Elgin Lutheran Church got started, we were part of the Claremont parish, and it was West Claremont, East Claremont, and Highland. And because of the distance involved, sometimes we had church every 3rd Sunday, sometimes we had church every other Sunday. The alternate Sundays, then he could make both the Claremont churches. And then you remember Pastor Ramsey came Well, he had church in all the churches every Sunday, tried. Highland usually got afternoon services. One day he was very, very late. We waited, and nobody liked Sunday afternoon church. Finally he came with a red face. He had been driving down 56, listening to a ball game, and completely forgot where he was.
So, and now your church is affiliated with Elgin?
Now we are yoked with Elgin Lutheran.
And the same pastor serves both?
Yes, yes.
And about how many families do you have in your church?
Well, our membership is scattered from California to Texas to wherever. Michigan. And I think we have 88 baptized members, but the Sunday attendance is 20, 25. Not as much as it used to be. But there are so many abandoned farms around here and no children.
We don't have a Sunday school.
You don't have a Sunday school?
No.
You don't have enough young ones?
We have one.
Okay, so that makes the future for your church.
Well, as long as we have faithful people, we do have resources.
Yeah, I know your church has always had resources.
Yes.
And you've helped with the resources.
Yeah.
Would you like to move on to your residence where you're living now? And Arlene, do you want to start?
Okay, we're living on the Ole Torkelson farm that my grandparents owned, and they started this house that we're living in 1909, and they finished it in 1911, and the carpenter was my father. And after my father had built the house, he married my mother. He found out she was a good cook.
In those days, they fed their help.
Oh, you bet they did. Grandma Torkelson said that when they had carpenters, they set 2 tables. First one shift and then the other. So it was hard work. And of course, in those days, all the material was sawed by hand. They didn't have power saws, so that's why it took so long. And I guess that's about all I know.
It took 2 years.
2 years to build a house.
Can I tell you a little bit about the background of Ole and Isabel? Ole came to America with his mother in 1856. He was 4 years old. I guess he brought his mother over, but more of her family came. He lived down by the river, a mile down the river. Isabel, or Ingeborg, came with her parents. She was 6 weeks old, and they came in 1867, and they lived a mile west of here. And as soon as Ole had enough money, he started buying land, and he bought little parcels, and they all added together. And our mother was born in a log house. In a couple of 3 years, they built a frame house up on the hill. Then Grandpa bought the farm down here, and it had a better barn, so they tried to move down to this little old house across the road. Well, too many children by that time.
How many?
I can't really tell you, but there were 11 in all.
Ooh.
So they moved back up on the hill again, because it was a new house. You know, they had a new house. It was a 5-bedroom house up there. And then they tried walking back and forth to do the chores. And I suppose that's where Grandma cooked for 24 people for 2 years when the carpenters were building that house. And then it was too much work to be back and forth, so they built down here. And of course, by the time they built down here, as Arlene said, you know, they started getting married, and so the house got to be pretty big.
See, the house has 6 bedrooms upstairs and 1 down.
Ooh. That is a lot of bedrooms.
Yeah.
Do you keep them all up?
We have to have.
Do you ever fill them all?
Oh yes, when the Bible school was on and the cousins came from different places and Frank's boys came from Dubuque, we sometimes had full house. Corrine would get up early in the morning and pack their lunches, and then she'd take them up to Bible school.
Arlene remembers when Grandma lived here still, and there were 6 grandchildren. And some of those grandchildren, too, remember how when they came for Christmas, they'd stay overnight. And the kids would sleep crosswise in the bed. Because, of course, you know, 13 adults plus some in-laws and 6 kids. I think they filled the house
And you continue to fill it from time to time.
from time to time.
Because you have boys that come to stay with you from Dubuque.
Did.
Did.
They're grown up now, but they have. Christmas Eve, we all stay here overnight.
And of course, Neil's daughter, this is like home to her.
Yes.
They were home last night to celebrate her birthday.
Oh. And that, now you're talking about Neil and Eleanor's daughter, and her name is
Sue Meyer.
Sue Meyer.
Sue and Jeff.
And Corrine and, Arlene, Eleanor and Neil live where?
On the other farm, a mile up the road, a mile south of here.
And would you like to tell a little bit about your relationship with them?
Our blended family?
Yes.
Well, because Eleanor always taught, and we have always had a housekeeper, and because most of the farm work, you know, the center's down here. This is the main farm. Neil is here most of the time. So as long as he's here, she was teaching all the time. All the time I was teaching and Arlene was teaching, and after my mother needed help, we had a housekeeper. And after my mother died, the housekeeper stayed until Arlene retired. So the eating was always done here. And so they still eat here because it's more convenient. And so with this, we have one rule, or we have dinner at 12:30 at noon and supper at 6 o'clock at night. And it can be any time. That can be variable. I mean, can be changed as long as it's announced. And it doesn't matter how many people, how many workers Neil has to help to feed here too, as long as he says. And that's, we could, you know, we've done this now since 1959.
58.
58, no, 59.
Well,
Yeah,
well, they lived in a trailer in the backyard the first year.
yeah. So,
Until we got the second farm.
Now for someone who maybe not know you, how is the relationship between you and Eleanor?
Oh,
She's your,
Eleanor's
Oh.
our niece.
she is your niece. Yes. Okay.
Eleanor was born in this house.
Oh, she was.
She was one of the 2 people born in this house.
She and Dolores Everett.
Yep.
They're the only people born here. There were 2 births and 2 deaths.
Dorothy said she lived here.
They lived here, yes.
Dorothy Fowler.
They lived here when Dolores was born.
Okay. I did.
And 2 people have died here. Our brother and Sylvan Torkelson's mother died here.
And how old is this house?
1911 it was finished.
1911. And no one has lived, it's always been relatives, some member of the family that's lived here. I mean, no one.
Grandma lived here until, I suppose, 1928. I think 28. And then Oliver and Reva, so that's when Dorothy and Dolores, Norma lived here. And then William lived here until Luella died in 1935.
And then you came.
And then we came. We've been here ever since.
And at that time, it was your mother and you two, was that a family unit at that time?
No, our brother.
Or a brother was
We were
with you?
brothers
And
with
our dad.
And your dad was
Yeah.
still living?
Mhm,
Okay.
sure.
So there was 5 of you then? And then
Well, Ernestine and Shorty lived here too, Eleanor's folks,
Mhm.
for a couple of years.
Oh, really?
Well, till after Eleanor was born.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has really been almost a hotel.
Well, and then we had William's children when we first came.
Yeah.
When we first moved here, that was our reason for coming here, was that Luella wanted my mother to take her children.
Oh, okay. So even though you do not have children of your own, you feel like you do.
Oh, yes, we have a...
You have
an extended family.
You
yes.
have a really
Yes.
strong extended family that thinks dearly of you. Okay. Now, maybe we could talk a little about, I think each one of you told about your education, but you didn't tell about your job, so we'll start with you.
Well, 3 years of teaching in the rural school, what we call the Elgin school, because at that point, that was in the 1940s, and teachers are very hard to get. And also, I didn't have too much money, so I was supposed to be saving money to finish my education. I went to Iowa State. I'd done teaching, you know. Then I majored in dietetics. Then had to follow that, even though my mother wrote to me every week. And during my senior years, she kept saying, "You are going to get a job, aren't you?"
Mothers always worry about jobs.
Yes, especially, you know, I mean, after all, it cost $1,100 a year to go to Iowa State at that point. But anyhow, I did do a dietetic internship at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester. And then they asked me to stay on the staff, which I did until 1953. And then I went to St. Luke's in Cedar Rapids, where I was an assistant administrative dietitian. And I was there until 1957, and then I thought, oh, I gotta try my hand at teaching again. So I taught at Dundee for 1 year. During that time, my brother died. I needed to come home. And it shook our family up. And so, when M.H. Moore came down here to visit after the death of my brother, he then later said I was home. He visited with me. I was a home ec teacher, you know. So he later said to Arlene, "Does Corrine want a job at Valley?" So I went up one Saturday night, and we looked the school over, and he had a contract for me, and that was it.
Well,
So 30 years later, I resigned.
And retired.
Yes, yes.
But now you're tired from being retired.
Yes. During that time, during those first years, in the summertime, then I would go back to Rochester and do vacation relief for the dietitians at the clinic. I did clinic work for quite a few years, and that was a vacation for me too. You know, get back among your friends and have a little income and
Right.
keep your finger in the pie.
Right. And now, Arlene, would you like to tell about the different jobs you did
Well,
a little
I did.
bit?
I told about my jobs, and I don't think there's anything else to tell except that I taught in Elgin then a total of 34 years, which is a long time.
I don't think you told us what grade level.
Oh, I taught first grade. I taught fourth grade in Elgin because the last year I taught at Waverly, I had taught fourth grade and I liked it. And I liked fourth grade material, but I also thought I could do a better job of teaching reading than what I was seeing. So I went to Elgin where there was a first grade opening and I got the job. And
What?
I always stayed in first.
What do you believe is a good way of teaching reading?
Plenty of practice. And not just literature-based reading either. You have to have a controlled vocabulary when the child is learning to read. I think what they did, the math was an improvement, but it wasn't to the reading.
It gave them maybe a better appreciation of literature.
Well, there was literature in our reading books, though. They had the stories in the reading books.
Okay. And now, is there anything else about your jobs that you would like to tell about? I would like to have you, because what are your extra children at your home here?
Pardon?
Your extra children. I call it your dogs.
Well-
That's the way Janice is. She has a dog. We call it her child.
Oh, what would you like to know?
Anything.
They're very special.
Have you always had lots of pets?
Yes, we did not, however, ever have animals in the house until Amy Lou, my cousin, got to live with us, or was going to live with us. And a lady gave her a puppy, and Amy got to have the puppy in the house. Perpedur was the first dog in the house. After that, they sort of sneaked in.
And you have 2 dogs now.
2 at the present time. We have Buffy and we have Max, and they're both very intelligent dogs. And
I hear Buffy got a birthday card.
Buffy has a birthday card. Buffy is quite a dog.
All right, now I'd like to move back a little bit, and if I say childhood memories, I'd like to have you go back as far as you can, and what comes to your mind? Either one of you can start that wishes to.
You have all day.
No, I don't have all day, but we'll go until I think we haven't stopped the tape yet for the first side yet, so we're fine.
Well, I really don't know where to start, or what to talk about. Maybe food. The other day when I was talking to the cats in the basement, the cats are Neil's, by the way, but I feed them every morning, and one had made its way into the house that had been an outdoor cat. And I said, well, how do you like it? And he said, well, the eats are pretty good down here. We serve meow mix in the basement and co-op cat food outdoors. So anyhow, that just made me think, times have changed. We don't call it eats anymore. The people used to say the eats, they talked about their food as the eats. And then I was thinking, we used to have peach sauce and apricot sauce, and we don't have that. We have canned peaches and canned apricots. So we've changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, now that's something that maybe might be interesting to people. Then I was also thinking about food. More things about food. I guess the first things I remember about food were like during the Depression, when we didn't really have a lot of money, but thank goodness we had moved to the farm in 1929, so we always had eggs and milk and vegetables, and of course the dessert. My mother's meal pattern was meat, potato, one vegetable, pudding at noon made from eggs and milk, and at night it was warmed over meat, fried potatoes, vegetable, and sauce.
I think that was very typical of most farm families.
And
That
then
sounds like
the sauce, of course, in the Depression was applesauce, gooseberries, which I hated, rhubarb, blackberries,
Canned peaches, a few.
well, that was Sunday.
Oh,
Canned
that-
peaches and pears, that was
Company sauce.
company sauce, right.
Do you?
To this day, I hate rhubarb. To this day, I never would touch, I won't touch gooseberries. And I'm not at all fond of plums.
Well, I'm not too fond of plums, and I don't like gooseberries at all, because we ate them too. But I love rhubarb. I wonder, can you tell about, did your mother buy crates of fruit and can them?
Yeah, yeah.
Would you tell us a little about that? No one has told us about canning.
Well, when they went to town, the fruit would be in the wooden crates, like a crate of peaches or a crate of apricots or big cherries or whatever. And then you'd put them to bring them home, and when they had reached the right degree of ripeness, like the peaches would be scalded, slipped into the jars, and then make a sugar syrup of water and sugar, and cover the fruit with the sugar syrup, and then put them in a big canner and boil them in water for 18, 20 minutes, whatever the book said. And then that was what you had for fruit.
Do you remember how many jars your mother might have?
A lot of them.
The cellar is full of them. Most of them are empty.
Would it be would it be up in the hundreds?
Oh, no.
Not that many?
I don't think so.
Did your Arlene? Did your mother can vegetables?
Yes, she canned peas. And she sometimes would can as many as 40 quarts of peas, and I just loved them. It took me a long time to enjoy the fresh peas out of the garden, because I just as soon eat them canned.
Did you can corn, or did you buy that at the canning factory?
Oh, we used to can corn, but corn was harder to keep until we got the pressure cooker. And after we got the pressure cooker, it was easier to keep corn. Corn, had to be boiled for 3 hours.
And of course, we always had the meat was always canned.
Oh, yes.
Before.
Yes, that was one of my favorites. Would you like to tell about the canned meat?
Oh, butchering, I hated it. Because it took a whole week to get the meat canned. And by that time, the kitchen would be so smoked up and with all that grease around. Ugh.
Could you tell us some of the things you had to do with your canned meat? How did you start out?
Okay, my dad would do the cutting up, and they would cut the meat into chunks about this big, into cubes, I would say, just so that they would fit in the jar. And then my mother would brown them in the pan and put them in the jar, and then put a little bit of water in the jar, and then put the lid on, and then put them in the cooker again, and cook them for 3.5 hours. So they would keep. And the meatballs, they'd make meatballs, bake them in the oven, put them in the jars and seal, and go through the same routine. Now, my mother did fry down some pork chops. You know, have a big crock, and then cook the pork chops and cover them with lard, and then they would keep into the summer. And then, of course, they would put the hams in brine, and that. When we lived on that farm at Lansing, there was a smokehouse over there, and they'd hang the.
Can you tell us what a smokehouse is? I'm sure people aren't going to know.
It's just a little house in which they had made of non-flammable materials. You know, like this one, I think was what, hollow block. And you'd have a fire in there.
And you used hickory wood.
Yep. And you'd hang the meat, the bacon and the ham in there, and then you would. My dad would keep the fire going in there for a long time, and.
Do you have any idea how long?
No, I have no idea.
I remember my mother burned hers up for. It must not have been in a non-flammable material.
You mean the smokehouse burned down? Great.
Tasty ham, huh?
Okay, can you tell us about, now you told about canned meat. Can you, Arlene, tell us about, did you cook down the lard?
Well, I even still render
Oh.
lard. Okay.
We'll start right there, cooking down.
We girls really never helped with the butchering because that was always done when we were in school or teaching. But anyhow, I have rendered lard lately, and I just get the lard at the locker, the ground,
I mean, you still do this?
and I take it to the basement, put it in big kettles on the gas stove, and I never leave the basement when it's on there. And I suppose it takes a little over an hour to render out a kettle of lard when your cracklings are nice and brown, or not too brown, but I mean when they're done. Then you strain it, put it in crocks or in plastic pails, and then we freeze it in the deep freeze.
And can you tell us what you use your lard for?
Pie crust. You can't make pie crust without lard.
That's right. I've almost given up since I don't have lard.
And of course, we used to fry potatoes in lard, but now since Neil is not to have fat, we don't fry our potatoes in lard, we do it in oil. So it doesn't take as much lard now, or it won't, I mean.
Oh.
And Mother used to bake cookies out of lard, but we never did, after we were the bosses of the house.
And why not?
I don't know, I guess cookies are good with lard, but...
Have a little better taste with margarine or butter.
Well, I don't know. Now, I had a lady send cookies to school one day when I was teaching, and she said, now, maybe the kids will make a comment about these chocolate chip cookies because they're made with lard. That was Mrs. Hyde in Elgin. But kids ate cookies and never said a word.
Now, we've talked about rendering lard, and we've talked about making canned meat, and smoking the hams. What did you do with the sausage if it was pigs?
That was fried down too. In the
They were smoked.
They were, yeah, smoked.
Were
And
they
then
in
put
long things or casements?
No, you
or
just take and twist them. So they're like wieners.
Oh, no casing?
Yeah, casing on.
And put a casing in it?
Yeah, you.
We never did that, that's why I'm asking. Did you butcher both pork and beef? What did you do with the meat that you didn't can? Did you have any way of keeping that?
Everything had to be canned to keep it. Canned or smoked, you know, or put in brine.
And what did
Everything
you
was done. My dad used to make head cheese, of course.
And
And did you
and-
make, that blood stuff?
Oh yes, I was just going to mention. Yes, we thought that was really great. They'd save the blood. Has anybody told you about this?
Just briefly.
Okay, well, do you want to hear about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, at the time that the animal was butchered, they'd catch the blood and keep stirring it so that it wouldn't clot. And then when they had time, they would add flour and spices and cornmeal and stuff until it was thick like a dumpling maybe. And then you'd boil that in a kettle of water, and then you'd store it in a cool place. And then our mother would take it out, and usually they made it in lumps about that size, and then you'd cut it up like cutting up for fried potatoes, and boil it down in cream. Cream was a mainstay. You creamed the vegetables, you creamed everything got
We
creamed.
used to pour molasses over it.
Oh, did you really?
After, you know.
Of course, I wouldn't touch it today. But
You don't make that anymore?
No.
Then the lockers came, and what big change did that make?
Well, that meant the end of the butchering at home.
That even meant the lard rendering wasn't done at home.
No, they did the.
They would do it all for
In
you.
Elgin, they did. See, our uncles started the locker.
I'll tell who that is.
Okay, Clarence and Carl and Tom and Otto Torkelson, where the Valley Cafe is now. That was the locker. And I think Lou Denler worked there. I think he was probably one of the main ones too. And
They rendered the lard, we didn't have to do it anymore.
and of course they had a skating rink upstairs, so we went roller skating. So
So that was, were you glad to not have to do that anymore?
yes, yes.
But you only render lard because you can't get lard the kind that you like?
Well, I don't like the bought lard in town. There must be water added to
Mhm.
it. It doesn't make good pie crust.
And
That's why I render some lard.
And I used to get lard from somebody from the Wadena, but it was so soft that when I tried to make pie with it, it just, the crust just fell apart. I was never happy with that either. Okay, then I'd like to,
Can I tell you about the meal pattern?
yes.
I mean, about the meal? One more thing. I don't remember that we ever ate very big portions, and our dinner plates were smaller. And I guess I realized that one summer when I was giving a diet instruction to a group of people, and the guy said, "Well, if you go out and eat a steak," I said, "You eat a piece of meat, 3 ounces at the most, maybe 2 ounces." He said, "You're not going to leave that meat." I would have, it made me fat. But anyhow, I realized that we had smaller portions, and maybe that's what helped us with our meat control, with our weight control.
Mhm.
It used to be, you'd go out to eat, and you'd see a few people who were pretty heavy, and you figured, hey, those are the guys that must eat out all the time. They eat the whole big steak and the big baked potato and the sour cream and so on. I'm distressed now at the number of overweight people that
Oh,
we have.
and the young
I
people
think
that
we
are
have
overweight.
too many people, too many overweight people.
But sometimes the genes have a little bit
Yeah.
to do with it. If you look at your niece and you look at you and your sister,
But you see, Harriet, we grew up not eating big portions.
right.
We ate small portions.
So that was your secret of keeping.
Yes.
Very good. Now, I'd like to ask you, I know you live quite a ways from Elgin, and you probably went to Elkader a lot, but do you have some memories of Elgin as a child?
Oh, yes.
Let's start with Arlene this time. Okay.
Okay. I remember going to town on Saturday night, and the streets were lined up with cars, and the people would be sitting and standing and talking and visiting. And you could buy popcorn and ice cream cones, but we didn't go every Saturday night. And of course, we always ended up our visit over at Grandma Torkelson's because Uncle Tom would send one of us over to the pool hall. You know where the pool hall used to be?
No, I
Because-
don't.
Oh, the pool hall is where
Used car lot.
used
Papa.
car lot is. Torkelson.
Okay.
And we used to go down in the pool hall, and they would hand pack a quart of ice cream, and we'd go back to Grandma's and eat it.
Arlene, can you tell us how much some of these things cost at that time when you were?
Well, you could buy a double dip ice cream cone for a nickel, but I don't remember what the quart of ice cream cost. Do you, Cree?
No, maybe 40 cents.
I don't know.
And can you remember that when they took the ice cream cone down from a double-decker to one dip, and then we thought that was terrible.
And what do we pay for them today? Almost $2 a cone?
It's a big change, isn't it? It's a really big change. All right, now about Corrine. Do you have some memories from going to Elgin?
Well, see, Grandma lived in town from the time I can remember.
Now, we give her name. Grandma.
Isabel Torkelson. And we didn't often get to go over town. But no, one. What should I
Okay, I'll tell it.
No, 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 no. Well, of course, there are a lot of things. When Grandma's sons would always come over to the house for coffee, and sometimes they would give us a penny, or 2 pennies, or if they were real generous, maybe a nickel. And we'd go up to Evans Cafe,
Oh,
and Evans Cafe, you could get a lot of, and that's where the Lower Tavern is now, and you could get a lot of candy for a penny.
would you tell about Evans Cafe? No one has told about that. That would be where Eileen Troyer's family,
In Louise
in
Lance.
Louise Lance's family, ran a cafe.
Well, Arlene can probably tell you more about that.
Well, it was a cafe, but it was very simple. There wasn't much about it that was different. And I was a friend of Louise's, and I used to go up there. I stayed with Grandma Torkelson when I went to high school. And I would go up there after supper, and we would study together in the kitchen, and it was just a plain old table with a wooden top and not a thing on it, and a cook stove, or a big gas stove. And we would sit in the back room and study, or in the kitchen. And then along about 9 o'clock, Uncle Otto would come up for a cup of coffee, and he would come to the kitchen and say, "Are you ready to go home now?" He'd always walk me over.
I could tell you,
What did you buy with a penny?
some little marshmallow things. There was a little marshmallow hand that had a little ring on it that you could get for a penny. And other than that, I can't really remember.
But there was a lot of candy and things you could get for a penny.
They had
And then, of course, another thing I remember was Elgin had a homecoming, and we were all in the parade. Not Arlene, but Reva's kids, Oliver's kids, and we all had crepe paper crepe paper outfits, and our buggies were decorated, and
doll buggies.
Doll buggy.
yes, a doll buggy.
That
We
was-
were in the doll buggy parade.
You
that's
were
right.
in the pet doll and pet parade.
Well, it wasn't. I don't think it was a
It
pet
wasn't
parade. I think it was
pet,
just a doll parade at that point.
Now it's gotten to be.
Yeah, right.
Because when you were little, everybody had a doll buggy.
Mhm.
That's not so popular now.
And of course, I remember that Grandma had a refrigerator with with the unit on top. And of course, it was very small. It was probably 4 cubic feet or 6 cubic feet, I don't know. But she had ice cubes, and that was a big thing in the summertime because we didn't have a refrigerator.
Okay, now, what did you do for fun? I mean, did you do did you ever go to the movies, to dances? Did you do any traveling on the train or any of these things?
I had never ridden on a train till I was in college. Then I wanted to say I had ridden on a train, so I was going to take the train from Ames home. It took me all day to get as far as Oline, and then my mother had to come to Oline and get me.
When I was a kid, we rode on the train from Marquette to Lansing to visit my aunt that lived there. And you must have been along too, Chris.
Well, I don't remember.
No, you don't remember it, but that was my first train ride.
Do you remember ever going with horses?
Oh, well, in the spring of the year, of course we did. How do you think we got over these mud roads?
But you would have a car waiting for you somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Where did
yeah.
you leave your car?
Up on 56, I suppose.
Now, how far is it up to 56?
3 miles.
3 miles. So then you would take a horse and wagon or what?
Buggy.
A buggy.
Yeah, we had a Surrey,
You had a Surrey.
a purple Surrey.
Do you still have it?
No, the Amish came through quite a few years ago, and my mother was an old softy, and that Surrey was in excellent condition, and they conned her out of it.
You wish you had it back.
Yeah.
You don't have horses that you could use,
No.
but you could find some.
We used to have
Our horses disappeared when made their exit, I guess, when one year it was time. The only thing they were used for toward the end was to plant corn. And one year when my brother was going to plant corn, he couldn't find the horses, but he finally found them over by Volga City. After that, they used the tractor to plant the corn.
Did you ever use horses when you were making hay to pull the hay fork?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Was that a job that either one of you ever had to do?
I drove with a team in the field when they loaded loose hay on the hay wagon.
With a
course.
hay loader?
One way you could learn to drive the car was they always used the car on the hay loader.
On the
on
hay fork.
hay fork down here.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
My mother my dad had a Model T Ford truck years and years ago, and that was used to, my mother was supposed to drive it on the hay fork. One time she was halfway up the wood pile. That ended her driving career.
Now, you are Norwegian, and there's a lot of ethnic traditions that the Norwegians seem to hang on to them for a while. Can you tell some of the traditions that you have kept through the years as far as food or actions?
Well, of course, Christmas time is the time when we do the Norwegian food, and we do the lefse and the flatbread and the krumkake and the patimann and the rosettes and the nummergrøt and the fruit soup. And my dad always used to put a pole out on the peak of the granary with a bundle of grain for the birds. That was the last thing he'd do on Christmas Eve. Then, of course, combines took care of the bundles. But a couple of years ago, I realized they were having bundles up at Montauk, so I got Pat Biddycofer to save me a bundle. Last Christmas, I finally got a pole and put it out down here by the gateway, and I don't think a single bird ever came in.
Did you have bird feeders besides?
Well, Arlene feeds them up here in the tree.
So they preferred the bird feeder to your shock. Well, they probably weren't used to it.
They weren't used to it. They didn't know what it was for.
But
You didn't get any nests in it or
and of
anything?
course, we have to leave a bowl of cream out for the Eula Nissa, or he'll do naughty things.
Can you tell us a little more about that tradition?
Well, I guess I don't know how to say this, but you leave the bowl of cream out, or they'll do things. Oh yes, I can. One year when we still had dairy cows and I was helping down the barn, we always took the loose hay out of the mangers and put fresh hay in the evening. And one of Frank's boys were along with me, and he was scooping the hay out of the manger. And I said, you know, Dan, my grandpa was born in Norway, and over there. And then I told him, about the Nissa and so on. I said he'd do naughty things like leave the door of the feed room open, or untie the cows, or scare them so they'd step on each other. And Dan looked up and he said, I'd knock his block off.
Well, in those days you could blame it on to them. Nowadays people always, they sue someone because it's their fault, instead of just blaming it on to the imaginary Norwegian people.
But the Nissa would do good things too. Like a few years ago, Neil was just ready to go home at night, and he had this cat that always had to have a ride in the pickup. So he was going to take it for a ride. He drove down and around, and here, by golly, the gate to the barnyard was open, and the cattle could have easily gotten into the cornfield. But see, the Nissa was right there and got that cat to get him down there.
I don't know which one, but one of you makes those little cloth Nissas, don't you?
It must be somebody else.
Are you sure? I thought the one Eleanor gave me was one of you made it.
Oh, you made the one where the little Nissas hanging in the
Oh,
bag.
yeah, hanging in the little bag, yeah.
Yes, because I hang it
Yeah,
up
yeah.
every Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Okay.
think of you girls.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, since you've been retired, I want to get this in. And then I want to move back to the Depression and the drought. But I want to be sure to get this in. Since you've been retired, you people have done a lot of volunteer work, and I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about what you do with your spare time.
Who has spare time?
Well, the time that you now have since you don't work at a job.
Okay.
Let's start with Arlene.
Well, I used to do a lot of schoolwork for Eleanor, my niece, and I made cookies for the second grade and brought them up and helped them frost them, and helped make Easter baskets that we made out of washcloth, and we still do that. And
Do you miss helping Eleanor now that she isn't teaching?
well, no, not really. I got pretty good at my numbers. I could check number papers pretty fast.
Oh, I used to just envy her. I used to tell Ken, oh, I sure wish I had an Arlene or a Corrine. My life would be easier.
Well, it takes a lot of time.
It does. Well, of course, now, a lot of times they do things together. So that makes a little difference, but it still takes time with the
Well, when
little
they
ones.
had those tests, those basic skills tests, you know, I used to write the names on the test booklets, and it took a long time to do all of that. But I enjoyed doing it because I had always done it myself.
Mhm. And you have always make quilts, and you make, Arlene, you make soap for people, and I know you have done other projects.
We spent a lot of time making quilts or making a quilt for Iwalu.
Yes. And that's a hand-stitched
And we do
quilt.
a lot of quilting. And I do a lot of patching for a lot of different people.
Oh, really?
Oh,
You mean
my.
you
Patch overalls and, yeah.
you mend for people?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Well, just family. I mean, I'm in for Sue and for, sometimes I own
Susan
send
Denler.
stuff down. Susan Denler. And
Susan Denler's little boy said when he tore his pants, his mama could take it to Cream and Arlene and they would mend it.
That's cute. Okay. Now, let's move back to, do you have any memories of the Depression and the drought? I mean, either your own memories or your mother and dad talking about it.
Well, yes, in the 30s, I do remember the summers. It was so hot and it was so dry. And I mentioned this Model T Ford truck. My brother was a young teenager, and he was going to drive that truck on the grain, that was what they hauled the grain on that truck, rather than most thrashing rings used horses for that. But since they had that truck, he got to drive the truck. And it was so hot that I was assigned to hold a paper parasol to shade him from the sunshine because it was so hot. And I also remember that I had 2 sunsuits.
Oh.
And that's all I wore at home for every day. And every night after I took my bath, I would wash out my sunsuit. And then the next morning, it would be dry. And I suppose I was 6 or 7 years old, and I suppose that washing was kind of a slop around thing, but my mother let me do it.
Because you wanted to wear it again the next day.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that many more changes.
No.
And your mother
Well-
didn't wash that often.
Washing was once a week, yeah.
Mhm.
But what clothes we had, were homemade. And the Grandma Torkelson was just a real wizard at making over things like snowsuits and coats, and she did a lot of sewing for us, and never with patterns. So when you had to go up for a fitting, and you have to stand up on the dining room table, and then she'd take the scissor and wring out the neck, she'd call it. And I was always sure she'd just gonna cut my jugular vein.
And did
she never did.
And did they mark the hems with a yardstick when you stood on the table?
I suppose I don't
Skirt.
just remember that. But anyhow.
We'd like to talk a little bit about rural electrification. And do you remember when this came to your area? Start with Arlene.
Well, I suppose we got it in the mid-40s, and it was really nice, although when they wired our house, they didn't have to do anything because we had a Delco plant and the wire was good in it. But it was nice, then we could have an electric milk cooler, and we had an electric milk cooler before we had a refrigerator.
Because you were dairy farmers?
Right.
Most people were dairy farmers, and now we have so few.
My dad thought it was really great because he bought a second-hand electric stove, and then he could have his coffee before he went out to do chores in the morning.
So when we got the REC, we got an electric stove too. And then some years later, we got a refrigerator, so.
Well, and things like with the 32-volt plant, when Grandma lived here, she had a vacuum cleaner and a curling iron. But, that was the extent of the appliances.
Mm-hmm.
And so after we got the REC, and I should say, in 1937, the building the generator was in burned down. So from 1937 till the mid-40s, we had the lamps. And so it was pretty good to be able to flip the switch and get the light on again. Oh, my Uncle Otto had a light bulb. He had a problem keeping his hair bald. My mother had 7 brothers. They were all bald-headed. But this light bulb was supposed to stimulate the growth of hair. And of course, we always used it in the bathroom. And then of course, when we got the RAC, first time we flipped the light on, that burned the bulb out. It was blue.
Was that the end of it?
That was the end of the bulb.
What about ironing? How did that change
Oh,
your
Grandma
ironing?
had an electric iron. Yes, she did.
For the 32 volt?
Yes, she did.
You had that before, but then when you got an electric iron, did you iron more things?
No.
Uh-uh.
You didn't think that changed?
No, because my mother had a gas iron for a while. But she also had the flat irons that were on the stove.
And those were not much fun.
Oh, really? I couldn't say they were.
I don't
too
know.
bad.
You know, it was not all bad. Those kitchen stoves, there was one saving grace with those, and that was the oven door. You know, you could open the oven door and lay a catalog on it and sit on it and warm your back. Fantastic.
It was nice, wasn't it? And I don't know, but our stove had what we would call a little reservoir.
Yes.
And that always gave you warm water. Did you have that? Did you ever take your flat irons wrapped in paper to bed with you to warm up your bed?
No.
Did you have some kind of a furnace for your house?
Oh, this
There
was
is
built
a-
with a furnace.
There's
Okay. So you
there's
didn't
a
need
furnace
that.
here. Well, however, the furnace was so small that it didn't really heat the whole house very well. So we know what a cold upstairs is.
How did electricity change your milking for your dad? Besides, you said electric ice keeper for the milk.
Well, of course, they'd had a milking machine here when Grandma lived here.
With the Delco plant, they had a milk.
I don't know what it was powered with, but
I can't tell you what it was powered with.
They might have had a
But-
gas engine.
William and Oliver were teenagers. We got a picture of them, and they did the milking out in the yard in the summertime. But
Now, when radios, did you have a battery radio? Or
yes. With the REC, you could have the radio on all day long.
but with a battery you had to be careful.
With a battery, you just listen to the news and maybe a program at night.
Did you ever use a battery for your Christmas lights on your tree?
No, we never did.
Do you remember when you first had got Christmas lights on your tree, electric ones?
I think when we got the REC.
I mean, that was,
Probably.
then we got a lot of things. I mean,
Mixer.
more plug-ins, plug-ins.
It was kind of an exciting time to be able to not worry. With the Delco plant, you had to be careful not to run the juice down, right?
Yeah, right.
And did you get electricity right away, or was there with a REC?
Oh, no, the line was built along the river first. And then, I suppose because of wartime conditions, I don't know. But we're on a little short line that feeds in here from the south. So we were among the last people to get it.
The people farthest, I've heard that before, the people farthest away from the main line were the last ones to get it.
Yeah.
Do you remember any stories about people being afraid of electricity or having any reservations about electricity?
I really don't. I think at first, but I do remember when we first had it, I think there was a minimum, I don't know how many kilowatt hours it was, but people tried not to go over that minimum.
$20 a month.
Oh, it was not that much, was it?
Yeah, it was
No.
$20.
Something like that.
$20 a month.
I think so.
Well,
And of course, we elevated the hay up into the barn too, after we had the electricity. So,
oh yeah, there were a lot of,
there were
a lot of things we did.
All right, now is there anything else that you would like to share with us that we have missed?
I don't know.
well, one thing about country school, we all owned our own textbooks.
That's right. Well, that even was true
Oh,
some,
in town school, didn't
for a while, you know.
Well, of course.
You owned them rather than paid rent, you're
Right,
saying.
you owned them.
You owned them.
And then you took them to town, and we used to take the books that we were through with, if we wanted to sell them, to the county superintendent, and he put them in a back room, and then when people needed books, they would go there and pick them up for a few cents.
really appreciate talking to you today. And if you were to say one thing about why people should live in Northeast Iowa, what would you say?
Well, it's very easy living. You don't have a lot of traffic to deal with. It's a pretty place. I think we don't realize that until we get away from home and see what some of the rest of the world is like. But, you know, the Turkey River is very scenic. There are lots of spots along the Turkey River. I can think of the Motor Mill, which is a favorite the photographer's delight. 7-story mill built back in the middle of the 19th century. Elgin has a Keystone Bridge, the courthouse, which are both historic. Then Big Springs, then on up the line. There's a lot of history here, a lot of Indian history. And I think another nice thing about this area is that people have lived here for a long, long time. I mean, the same families have continued here, and that must say something for the area.
Let's see, how many generations would you have been here for you?
Well, starting with who? Starting with Eleanor?
No, great-grandparents.
Well, I'm going to go
No,
backwards.
I would say,
5.
starting with Eleanor's children.
Okay, with Sue
Mhm.
or her grandchildren.
And, well, I guess her grandchildren too, because they live near here.
Okay, that would be 7 generations.
7 generations that have lived
Well,
in here.
actually 8, I think. Let's see. Andy, Sue, Eleanor, Ernestine, Mother, Ingeborg, Asle, and Ole and Birgit. 8 generations.
That's a lot. Arlene, do you have anything to say about why people should come here and look the place
Well,
over?
There's a lot to see in this county, but Osborne is an interesting place.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of any others.
Then I think we'll say goodbye.
Oh.
And we really enjoyed having you speak with us and tell us all these good stories about the past. And
This has been fun. I could tell you a lot more things, but
I think we were fortunate as children to have a playhouse. I'll tell about the playhouse. My father was a sawed lumber along with farming, and he had to have a place for his men in the wintertime to eat their lunch, so he made a little house that he could put on his truck bed and take to the woods. And it was big enough that he had a square table in the middle, and there were 3 chairs, and then they had a little barrel heater that they would heat the building with. And then when it warmed up in the spring of the year, he brought the little house home for us to play in. And I remember when we were in Monona, Dad brought the house home on the truck, and the little neighbor boy and I were playing in the house, and it had 3 windows and a door. And the little neighbor boy got mad at me, and he picked up a chair and threw it through a window. Well, his dad made him pay for the window.
This is still running.
But anyhow, a lot of kids didn't have playhouses. Ernestine's children had it then after we were through with it. Well, we moved it over here to Lansing, from Lansing over here. And Ernestine's children in Elgin had it. And when her kids were too big to play in the playhouse, a friend of hers that lived at Durango asked if they could have it, and she gave it to them. The floor was kind of bad in it then, but it was pretty good size. I'd say it was about 5 or 7 feet. And an adult, a man, could stand in the middle of the playhouse up to the ceiling. So it was good sized. So see, it had a roof that went like this.
Very nice.
So I think we were fortunate children to have a playhouse.
I think you were too. Anything?
Is there anything about Indians that you know that your parents or anybody said we could still use this to?
oh, well, Grandpa Torkelson, who grew up down by the river, said when he was little, see, he was born in 1852, that they would see the Indians go up the river at night and come back down the stream in the morning. And then
In canoes, you mean?
in canoes, right. And of course, I suppose they didn't know what they were doing. But the Indians must have used a little English, because my Uncle Carl said Grandpa would say, they would say, plenty lead. And Merlin Cook said they would go up to get the blue clay to refine to get the lead. And there was a place in Merlin's corn bottom, where they had done this smelting, whatever. Then Grandpa's uncle lived over here in this old house over here, and his descendants told us that the Indians would come and look in the windows, and then the lady of the house, Sunuff, would give them food, and they'd go away. They didn't like salt in their butter, so she always made some butter without salt for the Indians.
Did they have any of your relatives ever have any problems with the Indians?
Oh, no. No.
Do you know what group of Indians they were?
Well, was it the Winnebago Indians that were in the northeast Iowa?
Well, the
Or Sac
Winnebagos
and the
were,
Foxes?
the Sioux Fox were here, and then they were moved here, and then the Winnebagos were moved here to make a neutral territory between the Sioux Fox and the Sac Fox.
Sac Fox, yeah.
And then the Sioux were on the north, and then there was this
Yeah,
long
neutral strip.
neutral strip, and that was the Potawatomi.
You know, I read in the old Elgin Echoes that even as late as into the 20s, the Indians would come up from Dubuque and would hunt around Claremont along the river. And Merlin Cook remembered too that he said even into the 30s the Indians would come up the river for hunting. He also remembered that when the Indians, Cooks of course were among the first people in the neighborhood.
You want to say their first names?
Well, Merlin Cook, but this would be Henry and Mary, I think.
Andrew and Mary.
Well, Andrew is his son.
Oh, okay.
Okay, anyhow, they would always give him a chicken. And he said the Indians, they always wanted to drop it themselves. You know, they always wanted to, I don't know whether they used bow and arrow or whether it was later and they had guns. I don't know. But they wanted to kill their own chicken.
Did you ever find arrowheads or Indian artifacts on your farm?
Yeah, but not for many, many, many years. Up on the hill, there used to be they found a mallet, you know, big round. I think I have part of one that I picked up, but it's been broken. I don't know if it's a real one or not.
Because the Indians did live along the Turkey River,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm sure that
Well, there was down at Turkey River, down below Guttenberg, you know, Millville, there was a big Indian camp there. And I kind of thought maybe they didn't live, well, maybe a few, but most of them were kind of migratory around.
they went up and down the Turkey River all the way from El Dorado down to, what would you say, Millville?
Even in the Gunder News, in the 30s, I believe I read a little article that the Indians had gone to Oklahoma for the weekend.
Okay, anything else about, we have a hard time getting in Indian stories, and the tape is done, but the video isn't done, so
Oh.
that's the backup anyway, so we
Oh.
sometimes run a little bit longer.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you think of something you want to say, we just keep on going for a little while.
Well, I can't think of anything really.
So we'll say goodbye to your Indian
Well.
stories, and thank you very much.